Well, good afternoon, everybody, and a very warm welcome to the National Disability Hustings. I'm David Brindle from the Guardian newspaper, and we're here to quiz representatives of the three main UK political parties on how their policies on June the 8th would affect the 13 million people who live with a disability. As 18-year-old Luke Nash, who's with us today, as he blogged for us on the Guardian website yesterday, he said, "We're more affected than any other group by political decisions. Benefits and social care have changed so much for disabled people in the past few years that I really don't know what life will be like in 2018. Well, let's try to tease out some pointers to that over the next 90 minutes. These hustings have been organised by three cross-sector coalitions: the Care and Support Alliance, the Disability Benefits Consortium, and the Disability Charities Consortium. We've got three excellent speakers: Penny Mordaunt, the Disability Minister for the Conservatives; Kate Green, the former Shadow Women and Equalities spokesperson for Labour; and Baroness Sal Brinton, the President of the Liberal Democrats. Other parties are available, of course. So why these three? Let me just take a moment to explain. Having consulted Electoral Commission guidance, the organising charities have narrowed the speakers to the three UK or Britain-wide parties, standing in almost all the seats, to reflect the charity's own UK-wide work. Additionally, it was felt important to limit the number of speakers to maximise accessibility for disabled people. And thirdly, the Conservatives, Labour and Lib Dems had the largest UK-wide representation in the last Parliament and represent a variety of views across the political spectrum. So although we could easily have filled the platform with speakers from a wide range of parties, it just wasn't practical to do so, and choices had to be made. Each speaker is going to have 5 minutes to make an opening statement, and following that we're going to split the hustings into three parts: welfare benefits, social care, and then finally employment. Under each of those sections, we'll take questions that have been submitted beforehand, then we'll open up to questions from you, the audience, and finally we'll try to take a question or two from Twitter. In order to make this event as accessible as possible, as I said, I'll remind the speakers not to speak too quickly, to use acronyms or jargon, and we'll try not to speak over each other, however excited we get, and that goes for you in the audience, please, as well. Clearly, this will help the BSL and deaf-blind communicators we've got with us today. We don't intend to take a break, but we may need to pause from time to time to allow the interpreters to catch up with the flow of our discussion. Finally, we're filming this event, which is being shown live as we speak on YouTube Live. And the Twitter hashtag, most importantly, is hashtag Disability Hustings. That's one word, hashtag Disability Hustings. So let's get straight on to those opening statements. Our panelists have drawn lots to decide which order they'll go in, and Kate Green came out first. Kate is the Labour candidate standing again for Stretford and Urmston, where she was first elected in 2010. She's been the Shadow Minister for Disabled People and the Shadow Minister for Women and Equalities. Kate.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and it's a great pleasure to be here at the Disability Hustings, because with 13 million disabled voices to be heard and your priorities reflected in the general election and in the plans for the next government, this is a great chance for politicians to understand what it is that's important to you. And Labour starts, and I start, with a rights-based approach to protecting the interests of disabled people and advancing life chances. And the foundation of that rights-based approach rests in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which Labour signed up to when we were in government, and which in our manifesto now we are committing to bring into and incorporate in UK law. In our own legislation, we also, of course, have the Equality Act to give effect in broad terms to those rights for me, which includes the right to live independently as you choose, the right to learn, to earn, to enjoy family and social life, the right to access services, both publicly and commercially provided services, the right to live with dignity, safely, securely, and free from fear, and the right, and I would say also the responsibility, to participate in public and civic life. For the chance to exercise those rights to be meaningful, of course, first, disabled people must be financially secure. We need a benefit system which is adequate and enables people to live their lives and meet the costs that come with disability, and we need the benefit system to work efficiently, fairly, transparently, and without the concerns that I know many have that it does not properly reflect the needs and lives of disabled people today. But of course, crucially, benefits are not the only source of income for disabled people, and we also need, for those who can and those who would like to do so, to ensure that access to good quality paid work is also a priority for the incoming government. And that means both obligations on government, but also on businesses and employers to ensure that workplaces are accessible, that disabled people are given the opportunity to progress and to achieve their full potential. And success in the workplace, of course, rests heavily on an education system which properly prepares disabled people for the jobs that they want to do. It's also important that we have an accessible environment, whether that means transport, the built environment, communication, sports and leisure facilities, and, as I've said, the ability to speak out, to represent, to participate in public life. But crucially for me, all of these ambitions come together in a recognition of the importance of the dignity and the autonomy of disabled people, the right to choose the life you want, and the equal opportunity to do so. And that requires the next government to come forward with a comprehensive strategy to advance the rights of disabled people, and a Labour government will do that.
Thank you, Kate. The panellist who drew the second lot was Baroness Sally Brinton. She's a Liberal Democrat peer and former health spokesperson for the party. In 2015, she was elected party president, the first wheelchair user to hold such a prominent position in a UK major political party, and she said that she hoped her election would make employers think again about employing disabled people. So.
Thank you very much. And my start point is the same as Kate and Labour's, that the United Nations Charter for the Rights of the people with disability has to be the UK's start point. And unfortunately, there are major problems, and I think the questions that come later will demonstrate some of that, and we would continue to want the country to sign up to it. We would particularly want to make sure that the right to work and the right to have the appropriate support are unlinked from each other. There is no reason why disabled benefits should automatically be linked to work. And part of the problems over the last few years has been that inevitable linking. But we would actually go back one step. And the Liberal who created the health service, introduced by Labour, because we were not in government at the time, William Beveridge, said, and I think it's still worth repeating, social security must be achieved by the cooperation of the state and the individual. The state should offer security for service and contribution. In offering security, it should not stifle incentive, opportunity, and responsibility. And the Liberal Democrats are extremely concerned that those last three things, incentive, opportunity, and responsibility, are very, very much stifled under the current system. We would want to scrap benefit sanctions. We would want to scrap the household tax. We would regret the closure of the ILF, and would want, no acronyms, Independent Living Fund. We regret the removal of the Disability Commissioner and the Disability Committee at the Equality and Human Rights Commission, and we would want that reinstated, because we believe these are fundamental building blocks to getting other things right. We recognise already as a party BSL as an official language, and we say that as part of that, it's not good enough just to say we recognise it. We have to provide the support that is necessary to make that a reality. And one brief example is that the current government closed or did not reopen the Access to Elected Office Fund, providing support for people with disabilities standing for council and parliament. And the main people who have suffered from that have been those who are deaf and require BSL interpreters. And I have a close friend who has been unable to stand this time because he wasn't able to get the support from that fund. We would reinstitute that, because it's not good enough just talking about people with disabilities having employment opportunities. If we don't have people with disabilities in the House of Commons is not representative of the country as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you, Sal. And our third panellist is Penny Mordaunt. Penny is the Minister of State for Disabled People at the Department for Work and Pensions, and she's standing again for the Conservatives in Portsmouth North, where she's been MP since 2010. She's a Royal Naval Reservist, and she formerly had a senior role at Disability at Diabetes UK. Penny.
Thank you. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and can I add my thanks to those already given for everyone that has put on this event this afternoon, and for you all being here. It is tremendously important that this hustings is taking place, because what Luke says in his blog is absolutely right. There is no group in society that is still so discriminated against, whether it be the barriers of the environment, of attitude, or the failings of the state. These hustings are rightly and understandably focused on welfare, social care, and employment. But unless we address all the barriers, we will fail to provide people with what they need to thrive, to reach their full potential, and to achieve the ambitions they have for themselves and their loved ones. The ability to make and own a home. We need new homes, and we need to ensure that they are accessible, whether they're in the private sector or the social sector. We need greater accessibility to buildings, facilities, and we need real equality of experience. And to do that, we need to methodically review regulations from licensing, building, planning, parking, and others. And we need regulators and also new ombudsmen to protect the rights of disabled people. We need to address the issue of the extra costs which often accompany disability. Building on the work that Scope have done and the Department of Work and Pensions on social tariffs, and in particular, the energy sector and the communications sectors. The ability for children and young people to be better served by the education, health, and welfare systems than previous generations, and for the most vulnerable, including those who have been institutionalized, sectioned, or detained, we need new legislation to protect their rights and to ensure that they are receiving the most appropriate and the best care. Those are some of our other manifesto commitments, and unless we take that comprehensive approach, we will fail. We cannot do this in a half-hearted way. And sometimes those challenges can appear to be daunting. I don't need to tell you that. They've been in the too tough in tray for too long. Whether it's the complexity and the vast nature of the welfare system and the achingly long time it takes to reform, the scale of the challenge on inaccessibility, or sometimes the thoughtlessness of society. But in the 10 months that I have been your minister, I am convinced that this is achievable. It will require investment, and that will require a strong economy. It will require national and local government to work together and all the arms of the state to pull in the same direction. It will require a focus, as never before, on the precise local unmet need and on the needs and ambitions of the individual. And it will require us to lever innovation, enterprise, new technology, and the efforts of all sectors and all of their talents. And that is our approach in our manifesto. It can be delivered, and it must be delivered, because unless we enable every one of our citizens to reach their full potential, our country never will.
Thank you, Penny. Focus as never before, the Minister says. So let's see how we apply that on our three topic areas, starting with welfare benefits, which I predict will be the meatiest part of our discussion. We've got a question from Clive Lever from the Thomas Pocklington Trust. Clive.
Hello. If elected to power, what would your party do to make the benefit system simpler, fairer, and better fit for purpose, and one which no longer requires disabled people to pay for their benefits with their dignity?
Thank you, Clive. What would you do? What would you do in government to make the system simpler, fairer, and better fit for purpose, and make it one which no longer requires disabled people to pay for their support with their dignity and their well-being? Kate.
There's no doubt that the welfare system has become both less adequate, less generous for disabled people in the last 7 years, and also even harder to navigate and to feel confidence in. The fact that we see people looking for a welfare system that offers enablement and support, actually creating hurdles and fear is something we must all regret. And the fact that benefits are not proving adequate to enable disabled people to live their lives with dignity is something that we must address. In particular, in relation to benefits that are linked to employment, such as Sal talked about a few moments ago, the Employment and Support Allowance, we have some important cuts that Labour is committed to reversing for those in the work-related activity group. The personal independence payment, which is supposed to meet the additional costs of living with disability, but which in fact is seeing an increasing number of disabled people not eligible for the benefit and losing access to mobility vehicles and other forms of support as a result, and particularly the most recent decision by the outgoing government to reverse the decisions of the Social Security Tribunal in relation to certain PIP claims, we also intend to reverse. And the changes to benefits for housing costs, including the bedroom tax and the hand-to-mouth changes to support for those in supported accommodation, also need to be addressed. But also important, as Clive's question alludes to, is the dignity and respect with which we conduct the system. And I would say that many disabled people would feel that in the way in which they are treated in applying for benefits, appealing decisions, asking for factors about their lives to be taken into consideration and given appropriate weight, the system does anything but that. So let's start by remembering that we all have the right to participate in a shared system of social security, that at any time any one of us could need the support of that financial safety net, and that we should be ensuring that at every step the system is transparent, fair, dignified, and that disabled people, rather than fearing their need to access it, should be confident that it will be there for them.
Thank you. Sal Brinton.
We think one of the main barriers at the moment is the work capability assessment, or the whole range of assessments that people with disabilities face. And we would scrap the nationally based work capability assessment and replace it with a locally administered assessment which would have a real-world test about employment that is available in the area, as opposed to a notional job that might be available somewhere in the country that people might theoretically be able to do. But we're also clear that we want one single form of assessment, because the number of assessments that people are being asked to attend is ridiculous, with the same questions being asked again and again. We also want to see more people having access, support from the Access to Work scheme, particularly people with mental health conditions who have often found it very difficult to get support. We believe that there should be an in-principle agreement to the level and the nature of support that they need for any particular job before they go for an interview, before the job application process. So it will act as a support for them when they get into the interview, rather than having to negotiate after the interview. We think it's very important that the 2-tick system is expanded and really positively supported by employers everywhere. We think in particular that there needs to be an improvement for 2 ticks in the recognition by employers of people with mental health conditions. And we also think that the current bureaucracy around renewing the 2-tick system for applicants is too much for small firms. So if small firms have a good track record of employing people with disabilities, we say that that burden should be reduced for them. And then finally, we would improve the provision of occupational health services because we believe actually employers themselves need support in the workplace to provide for people with disabilities. I faced this myself before I was a wheelchair user, with an employer who found it difficult to understand that suddenly I couldn't drive hundreds of miles around my region every day as part of my job. And actually, a lot of employers just don't use occupational health at all. I've already mentioned our worries about ESA, and we would reverse the cuts to the employment support allowance to those in the RAG group. We believe those cuts have acted as a disincentive to move into work, and we also think that it particularly demonises people with disabilities and health conditions, and Theresa May has been pitting the working poor against the temporarily not working poor. The government offered a condition that anybody who was currently in it would not be caught by the new arrangements, but that doesn't count for anyone who has a short-term contract or changes a job. Suddenly you have become a new employee and you are caught by the new system. We would change that.
Thank you, Sal. and Penny Mordaunt.
Thank you. Well, we have said that we will legislate to reform the work capability assessment. The assessment was introduced by Labour for the best intentions, but over the years people have tinkered with it, they've tweaked it, but they haven't addressed the fundamental flaw at its heart, which that it's incapable of treating someone as an individual. It treats people like they're part of a sausage factory. It needs to be reformed, and with that comes opportunities to also streamline and bring together and make sense of the other benefits in the system. One of the things that really struck me when I first became a minister is that over the years, over many years, there has been a shift away from healthcare into the Department of Work and Pensions, and then to contract assessments out. And there has also been a multiplication of assessments. You have assessments, you have a decision maker, you have mandatory reviews, and then everything else that follows. And the other thing that struck me when I sat in on assessments was that the individual being assessed was in front of a healthcare professional for hours. Probably the most time that they had ever spent with a healthcare professional, and got nothing from that experience. The healthcare professional couldn't refer, they couldn't flag up advice or any issues. So it struck me as a very poor way of doing things. And if you ask yourself what part of the public services is best geared to treating someone as an individual, where does all the peer support sit? And that, for me, is in healthcare. So before I arrived on the scene, there was already moves within the Department of Work and Pensions to create what they call a public sector comparator, to bring assessments in-house. But I think if we just do that, we're missing a trick. And we need to learn from healthcare that has really good care pathways, that understands the psychological journey someone is on, whether they have been born with a disability, whether they have had a diagnosis, whether they have had an injury or accident. And I think that we don't just need to tinker with the benefit system, we need to learn from the healthcare system. We need to, as develop an occupational health service. We need to do these things. But we need to bring the benefit system in line with what goes on in healthcare, so that you have not just healthcare professionals, but the subject matter experts sat in front of the person, and only then will you get value for money, and you will get value for that individual and what they need.
Thank you, Penny. You sound as if you've not been very happy or satisfied with what's been happening on your watch in the 10 months you've been a minister.
Well, I think ministers are wasting their time if they pat themselves on the backs. I mean, that's not what we're there to do. We're there to find where things don't work, where they're not delivering for people, where money is being wasted, and to make them better. So if I wasn't focused on those things, I don't think I would be doing my job. There is a lot of good work that has gone on in the department, and I pay tribute to the officials there and many of the people that work in Job Centre Plus who get a really raw deal, and there are some great and very passionate advocates for disabled people working in my department. And there have been changes and reforms that we've been able to bring in within those 10 months, whether it's been changes to the assessment process, whether it's been the reforms to Motability, but that is what we should be doing. So I am focused on what doesn't work, and I think we've managed to get into the manifesto a legislative commitment to dismantle the work capability assessment. There are some things we can do prior to legislation. We have to have legislation to change the type of paper that assessments, I mean, it's crazy. But there are some things that we can do in the interim to bring PIP and ESA together to hide the wires, if you like, of those assessments so that it's still legal, but the experience that someone is going through is much better.
Thank you. We said we wouldn't use acronyms, but I think most people will know what PIP and ESA are in this room. Let's take the discussion on. Let's hear from Mark from the Motor Neurone Disease Association. Mark.
I think this is a related question. At a motor neuron disease assessment reception last October in Church House, the Minister for Disabled People stated that the government would end reassessments for ESA for those with severe lifelong conditions. She personally reassured me that this is DWP policy from now, although details had to be worked out. But I think we're still waiting for this to happen. Reassessing anyone with a severe lifelong illness, whether for ESA or for PIP or for social care, particularly when they are already at the maximum entitlement, is a pointless waste of time and money. It's unbelievably stressful and disruptive to patients, carers and their families, particularly as if you're on the maximum and you're going to be reassessed, it implies you're going to lose something. Will the panel say when they are going to stop benefit reassessments in these circumstances? And will they agree that to treat some of the most vulnerable in society and their carers and their families in this way reflects poorly on a society that is meant to be caring and compassionate?
So thank you, Mark. So would you stop benefit reassessments for ESA in the circumstances that Mark's outlined so clearly? Let's hear from Sal first.
Very simple answer, Mark. Yes, absolutely. I mean, apart from the importance of the dignity and well-being of the individuals having to go through these tests when they know perfectly well that their condition has not improved, and they know perfectly well that the healthcare professional sitting opposite them knows that as well, it is a ridiculous waste of bureaucracy and money to keep doing it. And I know the government have talked about doing it. It's time it happened, and it should happen immediately. We have a new government.
Kate, would you also do that?
Yes, of course. There is absolutely no logic and no justification for testing and retesting people with conditions which cannot improve and where indeed there is a prospect only of deterioration. It is, as Sal says, a waste of time, money, and emotional and professional energy, and it should stop.
Penny.
Yes, that is our policy, and we've been working very closely with the sector to develop that. In the interim, we expect that to come into effect formally late summer, but we have, in the interim, been doing our best in the system not to call forward people who we suspect will be in that category. But I think we need to do something else as well. And in designing this, I have asked the officials at the Department of Work and Pensions to be able to do it in a format that we could passport that information to local government. Currently, we legally can't do that, but if we were to obtain the permissions to do that, not just would we not be bothering people again, but it also means that for forms people are having to fill out, whether it's for parking or whatever, at a local level, we could actually help local government that really struggles with the administration of this. We could actually remove a headache for them and just enable that individual not to have to fill out the other forms that they do.
Thank you very much. May I just check with the communicators that we're not moving too fast for you? No faster. Okay, we get the message. Thank you very much. Another question coming from Fazile Hardy from the RNIB. Down here.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. So I'd like to ask a question to the panel. We've recently found out at RNIB that the Department of Work and Pensions has set a performance target around the number of benefit decisions which should be upheld during the mandatory review process. We've learnt that target is 80%, so the target is 80% of benefit decisions should be upheld by the mandatory review process. How do the panel feel that target fits with reviewing each case on its own merits, its own law, its own personal facts, as you'd expect from a review process?
Thank you very much. Penny, we better start with you. The point being made by Fazile is that there's a performance target in the DWP to uphold 80% of decisions on appeal.
Well, we ought to talk after this, because the only criteria that is there, the only performance targets for assessments is on the quality of those assessments. Otherwise, the whole system would be a nonsense. So I would like to know exactly what it is that you are referring to. The problem with why we still, although it's a small percentage of the total caseload, it's a large number of individuals, why we have people that are still having to go to mandatory reconsideration and then beyond into appeals is something that we really have to grip and look at. The large part of it is about people not submitting the right healthcare information at the start of that process. And this is almost becoming a self-fulfilling prophecy. There are some agencies giving advice to hold back stuff until your appeal. We need to reassure people that they need to put that information in at the start, and that we need to get those decisions right first time. There are 3 trials going on at the moment to get that to happen, which includes actually talking to an individual to go through what they're actually submitting, right through to if they don't get the decision that they need first time round, that someone actually sits down and goes through the reasons why they failed to ensure that mandatory reconsideration is the end of it and we get the right decision. But there are not performance targets either with our contractors on assessments or indeed with Job Centre Plus staff for what they do that are of the nature that you refer to. So we should meet after this and talk.
Okay. Kate?
Well, the target surely should be to get the right benefit decision first time, but we do accept that from time to time things will go wrong. However, when they do go wrong, it's important that decisions are reviewed quickly, corrected where necessary, and of course we would have a much better chance of getting more decisions right first time with a less complex and more streamlined system. Penny talks of there being no targets for the number of reconsiderations where the original benefit decision will be upheld. But as we know in practice, as you will know in practice, and as we also know from the history of sanctioning in recent years, formal targets are not the only thing which condition the behaviour of decision makers. Informal managerial pressure to uphold benefit decisions may be taking place in the system too. And that was certainly my experience in looking at a number of cases that were taking place in Stretford and Urmston. And it's something that ministers and managers alike must face up to and address. If you're entitled to a benefit, you should be getting it. There shouldn't be some numerical expectation that so many people will qualify and so many won't. And it troubles me very deeply that disabled people rightly feel that the system is stacked against them in that way right now.
Thank you. And Sal.
absolutely agree with the points that Kate has just made. Thank you to the RNIB for exposing what many of us have suspected for quite a long time has been the case, that there have been targets of one form or another, and it just has to be got rid of straight away. Absolutely clearly, no staff should be working towards targets about successful or unsuccessful appeals or about the allocation of benefits at all. We also think that part of the problem with the current system is the knowledge and the level of expertise in the health clinical professionals doing the interviews. I have rheumatoid arthritis, and I know many colleagues with RA who have found that the person interviewing them has no understanding of the symptoms and the life effect of the illness. They don't understand how crippling fatigue can be. So until we actually get people with expertise understanding the condition they're asking about, it is no use asking me if I get puffy after walking 50 feet. That's not the point. It's not the point. It's about the level of inflammation in all my joints. And that, of course, is one of the reasons why so many of the cases have been rightly overturned. But setting staff targets is not just unfair to disabled people. Frankly, I think it breaches the UN Charter that we talked about earlier on. I think it's desperately unfair on the staff who are having to administer this, because it puts them under pressure too, and I know many of them are unhappy as well.
I'm going to squeeze one more question in this section because there's so much interest in it, and this is from Denise from Rethink. Over here.
Hello, I've suffered from mental illness for over 30 years and worked as a mental health nurse for almost as long. In 2011, I became unwell and had to apply for ESA. I found the whole experience really awful, and it created a real, made my illness much, much worse. And the same goes for the assessment of PIP, which I've had an assessment for PIP and ESA in less than a year. It's just a total waste of money. And do you think it's acceptable for people with little or no knowledge of mental illness to do my assessment and that of others? And what can you do to make the whole process much less distressing for people like me and everybody here?
Thank you very much. If I could ask the panelists for fairly brief answers on this so we can move on. But Sal, this was the point you were making just a moment ago.
And indeed, I made a reference right at the very start to having a single assessment that was very much focused on the individual rather than on some national standard. The other point I would make, and I won't repeat that because time is tight, I think the other point I would make is that we're very unhappy with the benefits cap because people with disabilities have extra costs. And the moment you start to put a cap in place, you are denying that that exists. But we all know that it is there. And we absolutely want to see that cap lifted, and we want to ensure that benefits that you get because of your disability are there because you have extra costs. And we would want to protect those from any other overall working benefit.
Thank you. Kate?
There is general agreement that streamlining the system, reducing the number of assessments, carrying out one single assessment for multiple purposes where possible, and gathering all the information at one time are all very important, as are knowledgeable, well-trained staff both carrying out the assessments and making the decisions, because of course they are two different parts of the process. I think there's deep scepticism among disabled people that the system we have now, the work capability assessment and the assessment for PIP, achieve any of that. And it's why both Sal and Labour have talked about removing the work capability assessment, replacing it with a personalised, holistic assessment, while Penny's talking about a fundamental overhaul. What will be crucial in redesigning the system will be the engagement, advice and input of disabled people themselves. We need to draw on that lived experience, and we need to build a system that people have trust and confidence in, something that we really don't see today.
Thank you. And Penny.
Well, in addition to what I've said before about streamlining those processes, reducing the bureaucracy, getting subject matter experts involved. I think we do need to look at working much closely with healthcare. Nurses in my local hospital in a particular therapy area can tell me exactly on what day someone from admission is ready to talk about their income or is ready to talk about employment or whatever it is. We have really good information in healthcare about the psychological journey people go on and when they're ready and when they need to have conversations about particular things. We have got to, for whatever condition, for whatever disability we're talking about, whatever set of circumstances for an individual, that's what we need to design this system against. It's not about treating everyone, as I said, like they're a sausage in a sausage factory. And I'll just leave you with this thought. My budget is the biggest budget, both I'm going to use acronyms, Del and Amy budgets. It's the biggest budget of any minister in any department. It dwarfs, it makes the defence budget look minuscule. It is enormous. Imagine if we used some of that money to enable us to build those structures in healthcare, what we could achieve. And that, to me, is the biggest opportunity about reforms of the benefit system. It's to enable, actually, that unmet need at a local level in healthcare to be met.
Thank you, Penny. Let's move on to the second part of our questions, and these are on social care. And to open this section up, may I welcome Vanessa Bobb, who's from the Lambeth branch of the National Autistic Society. I think we're over here.
Thank you. 2017 marks the 20th anniversary of the establishment of the 1997 Government Royal Commission on the Long-Term Funding of Social Care. Yet today, our social care system is in crisis, with care homes closing and 1.2 million people across the country not getting the care they need. Will the panellists commit to fixing the social care crisis in the next Parliament?
Thank you. So 20 years since the Royal Commission on long-term care. We still haven't sorted out the social care system. Will the panellists commit to fixing it in the next Parliament? Kate Green.
Well, we've got to do two things at once. First of all, we've got to take urgent action because the system is falling apart right now as a result of the nearly 5 billion of cuts that social care has suffered in the last 7 years. But secondly, we've got to be looking forward, as the question suggests, to a long-term model of social care funding, which recognises not just the need for high levels of care for those with high needs, but also recognises that investments in small amount of care can produce big dividends in enabling people to live independently for longer, to work, to participate in caring for their families and in all aspects of life. So the first thing that Labour would do would be to inject money urgently into the social care system now, while beginning the work to put in place a long-term national care system. I'm confused about where we stand with the Conservatives' proposals, but what certainly does trouble me is that if there is not a cap on the amount that people could be expected to fund themselves, then that bears particularly harshly on young people and working-age adults with long-term or permanent conditions who inevitably will have the highest lifetime care costs. And it's also important that we have a proper public debate about to what degree it is right that individuals or families should fund social care needs, and to what degree, in fact, that is a shared social responsibility for which we should collectively share and pool the risk and bear the costs through a model of shared taxation. Those are enormous questions for us to debate and discuss as we take action now to rectify the immediate difficulties that cuts have created. One final thing that Labour would do very quickly is to recognise the extent to which care is provided and will always be provided in reality by friends and family members. And a quick thing that we will do on coming into office is immediately to raise the level of carers allowance to the level of job seekers allowance, it's quite ridiculous that you receive less financial support for caring for a family member to enable them to continue to live their life at home than you do when you're looking for work. Those two, at the very least, need to be equated.
Penny Mordaunt.
Thank you. Well, our plans on social care have received a great deal of attention during this campaign for a whole variety of reasons. I mean, the first thing we need is investment. If you were to put a penny on income tax, I think you'd raise about 4.6 billion annually. The Better Care Fund was around 4 billion. By doing that, you're not going to do, I think, what is actually required in this system as it currently exists, but also with the demographics that we have and an aging population. So we have taken some tough decisions to actually move some of the responsibility for paying for care to the individual. We're going to increase the wealth threshold that someone has, that protected amount of assets, from just over 23,000 up to 100,000. But there will be a limit on the amount an individual has to pay. That is the case. We are going to consult on that. And if we can do that for part of the system, clearly this is very much focused on older people, we will be able to take some pressure out of the system. And one of the pieces of work that I have been doing with the Joint Health and Work Unit is looking at social care for people of working age and support for independent living. The other thing I would add that we also need to do, we're doing good work with between the Department of Work and Pensions and Health, but we've also got to include education in this as well. So many young people are not getting not just the education that they need and skills training that they need, but also support to equip them to live independently, and we have to address that as well. Otherwise, we're not going to get those numbers for people with a learning disability being in employment, for example, being under 6%. If they receive both the education support and the support to live independently, that number goes up to 86% in employment. So those are the numbers. That is the difference that support makes. And my hope is, although it has been controversial and we have had a number of people say it's the wrong thing to do, I think it is the only way that we are actually going to get the money that we need into the social care system to actually provide what is required.
Thank you. Sal Brinton.
Well, in the first instance, we want to add 1 penny to income tax for both health and social care in order to help the current crisis. That will produce about 7 billion. We're linking health and social care together because many of the problems that people with long-term conditions face and the elderly is this complete lack of joined upness between the NHS and between social care. We think they should be brought formally together. Along with Labour, we supported the Dilnot Commission when it first reported in 2010-11. Unfortunately, the Conservatives did not, and it's gone even further into the long grass. Norman Lamb, who is our health spokesperson for the party, was very clear that there should be an independent commission to update Dilnot, but also to look at the funding in the NHS. And we will await their results. They were due to publish in June, but the election has obviously slightly delayed that. But as a party, we say there has to be a priority to help solve the current problem. On the Conservative proposals, we think they are the exact opposite of what Dilnot intended. Having this idea of what's being called the dementia tax, which doesn't recognise anyone with a long-term condition who needs social care long before they are elderly and likely to get dementia, is a real problem. And I'm sorry about the use of the phrase dementia tax, but the good news is that it means many more people in the country now understand what the Conservatives are proposing. It is extremely serious to put at risk people's houses. And I was talking just before the meeting to somebody in the audience about the problem for a couple who may have an adult with learning disabilities living with them at home, who had always assumed that after they'd gone, at least that child would have the house and be able to live in that house with carer support. That is now under threat under these proposals. We just do not know what the detailed impact of these changes are. We also want to ensure that independent living can continue. And one of the things that has been worrying me a great deal as the social care spokesperson in the House of Lords for the Liberal Democrats is to hear of people living in small units with support, where councils are saying that model is now too expensive and looking at going back to hospital-like large home accommodation. That is a retrograde step, and we would bitterly oppose that and will fight it, especially if it's being done for financial reasons.
Thank you, Sal. Let's continue the theme with a point from David Allen from the MS Society. David, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here, thank you. We're advised about the importance of eating fresh, healthy food and getting regular exercise. Yet people like myself find it impossible to get help with food preparation and housework. And I just wondered what you would do to address that problem.
So a contradiction there, Penny. We're encouraging people to eat healthily and cook healthily, but getting help with that is impossible, says David.
Well, I'd say two things. I mean, first of all, I would go back to the point that if we want the step change that we want to see in provision, in quality, and also that all need is met, we have got to get more money into the system. And it is not going to be the case that 1 or 2p on your tax is going to deliver that. So that is the first thing. I think that we need to learn the lessons of when we've devolved things down to a local government level, even when there is funding there and there are protections in legislation. What really does empower an individual to get what they need? Personalised budgets is a good thing, and we should be doing that in other areas as well. But the other aspect of this is the consumer agenda. People have opportunities closed off to them because they are not able to access whether it's local leisure facilities or other opportunities. And one of the things that I did in my 10 months was to introduce what we were calling sector champions across 11 sectors of the economy, one example of which is sport and leisure. There's lots of great organisations out there that are promoting things like sport in schools, promoting people taking up activities. But unless we ensure that the buildings are accessible and that people have those opportunities, people aren't going to be able to do that. So that is one other thing that we need to do if we're going to enable people to make best use of those opportunities to lead a healthy lifestyle or any others.
Thank you. Sal Brinton.
It's absolutely true that there is no doubt we should be encouraging people to eat healthily. That's vital. But you can't do that with visits of 15 minutes from carers. It is just impossible. And whilst personal allocations can work well, it does not work well when the level is so low, or particularly where councils are so cash-strapped they can't help. That's one of the reasons I go back to saying, again, we would have supported Dilnot. And if I can just correct Penny, I did not suggest that the 1 penny on income tax was going to solve all the problems. It is a temporary solution. until we can come together as political parties across the board and change the whole way this system operates. That is what Andrew Dilnot suggested. He said we ought, for example, to be having a pooling of social insurance that people would pay into from their 30s that would provide them with the funding that was needed for whatever the cap level was, so that their house would be protected and their income would be protected. That's the sort of thing we need to look at again. But this question was a very practical one about how the current support system works, and the answer is it doesn't. And I think we need to look also about how people can pool that resource and make it work for them. I know that a group of young mums in Wandsworth actually meet together to cook some good food together and then take it home and freeze it. That's the sort of thing that they've done as an initiative. And I think we ought to be encouraging that, particularly with councillors, about how they can make practical things like that work. It will not change, though, until we change the support mechanisms for people living at home.
Thank you. Let's take a third point from Penny from Parkinson's UK. Penny, over there.
Thank you. My name is Penny Kemp. A friend of mine who is wheelchair bound was called in for a reassessment for a social security payment and was told by the assessor that nighttime care could be abandoned and a nappy used instead. Do you think it's acceptable that a nappy is deemed a suitable substitute for human care? And a simple yes or no would do.
I'm not sure you'll get a simple yes or no, but let's see. So panel, is in these circumstances a nappy a suitable substitute for nighttime care? Kate?
No.
We got a simple answer. Penny?
No, it is not. I didn't catch where this was taking place.
It's Hounslow, a Conservative borough.
No. No, well, that's...
I got Parkinson's, and that's why probably my voice isn't very good. No. But we're the 5th richest country in the world. We do have the money, and we do have the ability to give people a decent standard of living.
My answer to the question is no. And what I say when I encounter things like that, whether it's in my own constituency, whether it is something that I find out by being a minister in my department, is I will always try and find the person that made the decision, and I will always ask them what they would want for their loved one or themselves. And I think that whatever sector you work in, if you are providing those kinds of services, that is the question that ought to guide every decision you make.
Sal Brinton.
No, and if I can give you another very brief example, a friend of mine's aunt in Bradford who has diabetes had a district nurse coming to dress her leg every day. There was a problem with the other leg, but the nurse had been told by the practice she was only allowed to use one dressing on one leg. The other leg was social care, not health. It sounds amusing. The result was this lady ended up in hospital, costing considerably more to the state, causing her anguish and distress, all for the sake of this attitude about we will cut costs at all cost.
Kate, would you like to come back and add to your earlier one-word answer?
Well, I think what we're fundamentally seeing is local authorities, clinical commissioning groups being put in a position where they are raising and raising the threshold for care, for support, because of the squeeze they've experienced in their funding. And to put that We need to put that right as a matter of urgency now to rectify the cuts, the nearly 5 billion of cuts that have been suffered in local authorities, which have meant that most local authorities are only offering critical care now and not the lower levels of care that enable people to live day-to-day lives in their own homes with dignity and independently. It's a false economy. It's an inhumane way to treat people. We need to do something urgently to get money back into the system, and then, as I think all parties have agreed, take the steps necessary to identify a long-term funding model that recognises our changing demographic but ensures that we start with the rights and the dignity of the individual.
Thank you very much. Let us move on to our third and final section, which is employment. And we have a question from Tim from Carlisle Mencap. Tim.
My name's Tim. I used to have a temporary job at home base in the gardening department, which I enjoyed. I now want to find a permanent job in the gardening centre or supermarket. Employers don't give people with a learning disability a chance, so we don't have an opportunity to show what we can do. What would you do to work with employers so they understand how to help disabled people through the process and give disabled people a chance to show what they can do?
Thank you, Tim. So what would you do to work with employers so they understand better how to help disabled people through the process and give them a chance to show what they can do? Sal Brinton.
I mentioned earlier about the 2 ticks schemes for employers, and one of the most important things is to expand that much more, particularly to smaller firms, because a lot of very large firms operate it, but then they have human resources and other supportive departments who are able to make that happen. The most important thing is to make sure that before somebody arrives at an interview, they've got all the support they need and the employer understands their condition so that it can be a positive interview about what they can contribute. And the organisations that operate this say, whenever I go round them, that they really value their employees with those disabilities because they are as important to the organisation as any of the other staff that they've got. And I mentioned earlier the importance of making sure the system isn't so difficult to administer that it turns employers off. And we would want to make sure that it's as simple as possible whilst being robust. A bit like Investors in People was when that was first launched. And it's really, really important that we have no bureaucratic burden that will stop employers from wanting to do it. And as I also said earlier, we want to make sure that occupational health advice is available to people as well, both to employers and to individuals seeking jobs, so that there can be realistic support available from day one. Again, talking to colleagues with my condition who have explained that they can't work particularly long hours, arrive at a new job, and then they're expected still to work 10, 12 hours without a break. That's exactly the sort of thing which is invisible, but really needs to be tackled and understood by an employer. Thank you.
Thank you. Penny Mordaunt.
So many things, but here are 4 things that we will do. The first is we need to bring all the advice and support that is there for employers together in one place, so we make it easy for them to access that. We are currently designing a one-stop shop which will not just have all the government schemes and all the national schemes and funds that an employer can access, but it will also be a shop window to the third and the independent sector, which provides the bespoke support that an employer needs. So if you've hired someone with autism, who are you best speaking to? Me or the National Autistic Society, who run those services? And we've got to, if we want the third sector to continue those services and to do them at scale, we've got to enable them to generate an income from that. So that's really important. The other thing that we need to do is to get a local community to spot opportunities and to carve out opportunities for people. We know how many people with a learning disability are coming out of education. Well, the local authority, the LEP, everyone at a local level should be focused on making sure that there are opportunities and there are the roles in organisations for people to get both work experience and a permanent job. The third thing we need to do is to create a new role. There are many good people out there who work in an education setting. Some will work for a local authority, some are in the Job Centre Plus office, who are working with employers locally to carve out those roles, but also ensure the employer is supported. But they're not done frequently enough or well enough. So we need to create those roles, not just to get a person into a job or get them work experience, but to stay with them and the employer over many months and make those small adjustments and give that support to enable that to work. And then finally, one of the things we have in our manifesto is that we will give an employer a national insurance contribution holiday if they employ someone.
And Kate Green.
I'm really passionate about people's right to work, their right to progress at work, the right to remain in work when your circumstances change and you need adaptations to be made to the way in which you work to enable you to keep your job and stay in employment. I'm passionate about that because it's good for the employer to keep a good, well-trained and loyal employee. I'm passionate about the right of the individual, and I'm passionate about the benefits that it would bring to our whole economy to enable more disabled people to thrive in the workplace. The first thing that I think we can be doing more effectively with employers is ensuring that the education system supports disabled people to acquire the skills and competencies that enable them to do well at work. That means ensuring that apprenticeships are available to disabled people. It means ensuring that we have good placements and internships available to disabled people to give them initial work experience and something that convinces employers of that experience when they put forward their CV. And it means using some of the dedicated individual placement and support programs where that's appropriate as a springboard to help disabled people make the move into work. Secondly, as Penny has said, we do need to ensure that the institutions in the local labour market work well for disabled people. That means working with Job Centre Plus, with the LEPs, and in Manchester, where I live, making the most of the opportunities of the devolution settlement to plan the whole of the city region economy in a way that ensures disabled people get the best employment chances. Sal is right to say that access to work and the support it can offer needs to be in place up front, and that must include not just for taking a job, but actually for taking a work placement or work experience. And finally, I think we need to be more ambitious in the challenge that we set for employers, public and private sector employers, particularly for large employers, where I think it's reasonable to ask them to be transparent about the proportion of their workforce that is made up of disabled people, but also that we use employer bodies to encourage and support one another and talk about the benefits they receive from employing disabled people in their workforce. If your workforce is diverse and reflects society as a whole, your business will be better at meeting the needs of society as a whole, and we need to be talking about the positive benefits that employers enjoy from employing disabled people with a range of life experiences.
Thank you. I believe we have a further question from Maureen Grossman from Arthritis Research UK.
Yes, thank you. Now, many people with disabilities, such as arthritis, actually do want to stay in work and not rely on benefits. Now, to a large extent, this depends on the goodwill and flexibility of the employer. But also, something like access to work could play an important part, but we find that many employers and many employees have never heard of it. So what would your party do to support the promotion of schemes such as Access to Work so that everybody knows what's available? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Access to Work and similar schemes, not many people or not everybody knows about them. Penny Mordaunt.
So 2 things. I already mentioned the one-stop shop that we want to create. What we mustn't do with that is spend a lot of money on making a really snazzy website and then no one's got any money to market it. So we have put together a business plan as we've been designing that to ensure that it is sustainable and can actually be properly marketed. So that's the first thing. We've got to make it easier for people to actually find what help and support is already out there. I think there are some other things that we also need to do around schemes like Access to Work. You can see how this happens. There is a need, a particular silo of government designs a scheme or a program to meet that need and address that situation. And even with a scheme that's quite popular, as Access to Work is, it really doesn't make a lot of sense in the real world. We don't look at who is coming out of the education system and what they might need. Access to Work currently means that it's a disadvantage to somebody wanting to take a promotion or change job. We've got to start, when we're designing these programs and schemes, to think about how you enable somebody to maximize their opportunities and to not put bureaucracy in front of them. So Access to Work, it's a scheme that's obviously tailored at the employer, but when we're designing those schemes, we need to think about how that might negatively impact on an individual. Whether it's we need, extending that scheme for work experience, or whether it's about having it more easily passported to enable someone, if they want to take a sabbatical, if they want to take a promotion, that it's not another bureaucratic obstacle to stop them doing that. So we've just got to get this to be more joined up than it is, and we've got to ensure that that portal is sustainable. And by involving the third sector, involving the business community in it from the start, we'll get it to do that.
Thank you. Sal Brinton.
I've already talked about the changes that we would like to see to the Access to Work scheme and also about the 2-tick system. I think there is one more really important role that government can and should do, and that's to get people to think in a completely different way about people with disabilities. There's been a real sea change in attitude over the last 2 years about mental health. Finally, it is acceptable to talk about mental health in the way it never was before. I would love to see that also brought forward for people with disabilities or with medical conditions in the workplace, because it's only by changing attitudes, whether it's employers, work colleagues, or colleagues more generally, we will actually see a change. And I say this as a disabled woman who has faced problems both at work but also even in Parliament, which is supposed to be promoting accessible venues, and I have to say it's one of the most inaccessible places to get around.
And Kate.
I must say I share all the ambitions that both Sal and Penny have expressed for ensuring that people are aware of the support that's available, ensuring that it's flexible, ensuring that it's unbureaucratic both for individuals and for employers, and for ensuring that it is, in a sense, portable, so that if you want to move on in work or take a different job, you're not worrying about having to start from the beginning again to ensure the support you need to do so continues with you. So all of that, I think, is laudable, and we should ensure also that there is money in the Access to Work pot to ensure ensure that people's needs in the workplace can be adequately met. We've got into a situation, I think, where for people with high costs, it can be more difficult to get that access to work support, and also can take some time to go through the process of putting it in place. But we also need to recognise that when things go wrong in the workplace, when people suffer discrimination or aren't able to get the support they're entitled to, that we need to ensure that they can have access to justice and to rectify the situation that they experience. And it's become increasingly difficult now for people who are treated unfairly at work to get the justice that they're entitled to. We've seen the paring back of the opportunity for trade union disability and equality reps to function effectively, and we've seen significant barriers put in place in terms of access to employment tribunals because of the new fees regime brought in by Conservative-led governments. We need to correct those barriers to justice as a backstop that ensures when people are treated unfairly and unequally and aren't able to participate at work as they are entitled to do, that we have genuine ability for those people to challenge that injustice and get action.
Thank you very much, panel. So those are our three sections: welfare benefits, social care, and employment. I hope you are now a little more informed than you were when we started at 2:30. We're going to invite the panelists now to offer a closing reflection, a summing up, in just 2 minutes. And again, we've drawn the order by lots. And Sal Brinton was first out of the hat. So Sal, your closing remarks.
My last remark was about changing cultural attitudes towards disabled people at work. And I think that has to be something that all of us can take away and encourage. And at a personal level, I tweet every time I hit a problem in the transport system, which is legion because many of my able-bodied friends don't understand how difficult it can be to get around in a wheelchair. But I think there is something much more fundamental going on at the moment. A range of cuts have particularly hit disabled people the hardest, and we would turn round those cuts and invest back in services for disabled people because, as a party, we believe in the individual's right to perform the best they can in society, and we feel that the current cuts have actually taken that right away from people with disabilities. We would ensure that there is more support for carers as well, which we haven't talked about much. I think Kate referred to carers. We would increase the amounts that you can earn as a carer, and the hours that you can work would change as well to make it much easier to be able to continue to work and care than is possible at the moment without losing your carer's allowance. We would also look very carefully at, for people with disabilities and medical conditions, about the priorities in the health service. People with long-term conditions have just been pushed to the back of the queue in the current arrangements, and that is not good for them, but it's also not good for employment prospects and for their long-term health. So finally, we've not talked at all about anything really outside benefits. I was on the Lords Select Committee on Disability, and one of the major problems that we have in this country for those of us with disabilities is getting around. It's finding housing, it's being able to walk through our town centres easily, access shops, retail, all of those things. The government has a very clear role in helping to reduce those barriers by legislation if necessary. The government has chosen not to follow that Select Committee's reports, and I urge them to do so, because this isn't just about benefits, it's about ensuring that every single disabled person can live the fullest life they can in this country.
And second out of the hat was Penny Mordaunt. Penny.
Thank you. I shan't repeat what I said at the start, but we need to take that comprehensive approach. We need to look at public services, but we also need to look at the consumer agenda. Unless we do those things in tandem, and we also lever all of the innovation and enable really social enterprise to deliver much of our public services and extend the reach so it actually meets that unmet need, we won't be doing what we need to do. But if you don't mind, I want to turn in my final minute away from the domestic agenda because I think if I don't mention the 1 billion people worldwide who have a disability, 80% of which who are living in developing nations, we would not be being as thorough as we might this afternoon. We have got to keep the aid budget strong, and we have got to shift more of that aid budget into supporting people with disabilities. That is what we are intending on doing, and next year we will hope to have a global conference focused on disability. We have tremendous opportunity in the UK, not just because we are a wealthy nation, but because we have such innovation and we have the answers to so many problems that would help those nations. And I hope that whoever you're voting for, and I hope you do vote, that you also bear in mind those individuals as well as the ones living in the UK.
And Kate Green.
Our ambition must be to maximise the participation of disabled people in every walk of life and ensure that we work to close the many equality gaps that continue to exist between disabled and non-disabled people. That requires, for an incoming government, a comprehensive and holistic strategy to make disabled people's rights a reality. It means investing in the services, the financial support, and the access that they need to fulfill their full potential. It means reversing the damaging cuts that have taken place since 2010 to social security benefits and to public services. It means investing in the support and the means of enabling disabled people to reach and fulfill their ambitions, and in particular in ensuring maximum access to and participation in top quality education. And it means underpinning our ambitions with an institutional and legal infrastructure through domestic legislation, our Equality Act, compliance with international obligations, and with adequate resources for our watchdogs and our Equality and Human Rights Commission to ensure that the interests of disabled people are kept forefront of the incoming government's agenda. That is what a Labour government will do, and like Penny, I hope you will take the opportunity to have your say at the ballot box next Thursday to ensure that the voices of 13 million disabled people remain at the centre of the next government's agenda.
Thank you very much. Well, that's it for the live session. We can keep the discussion going, though, after today on Twitter at hashtag Disability Hustings. If you want to find out more about the detail of the party manifestos, each of the three have produced accessible versions of those manifestos, including easy read for people with a learning disability, including audio, large print, and Braille. Thank you for coming and engaging and making this a great success. I'm indebted to the panel for their clear and succinct answers. We've kept to time, we've kept to our ground rules, and we've kept it courteous, which I think in an election campaign is something to be proud of. Please join me in thanking them very warmly.